The Briarcliff Hotel stood on a desolate cliff overlooking a turbulent grey sea. It was a gaunt, skeletal structure against the bruised twilight sky. Locals in the nearby village, a place too small for most maps, spoke of it only in hushed tones. They said it had stood there for centuries, a silent witness to countless storms and untold sorrows. Its windows, like vacant eyes, stared out at the churning waters below, reflecting none of the sparse light. The wind howled around its crumbling turrets and stone walls, carrying faint, mournful sounds that some claimed were the cries of lost souls. Few dared to venture near it after dark, for its reputation was dark, steeped in tales of misfortune and unexplained disappearances that clung to its very stones. The path leading to Briarcliff was a winding, treacherous track, overgrown with gnarled trees that seemed to claw at any vehicle brave enough to ascend. The air grew colder, heavier, the closer one came to its imposing silhouette. The hotel seemed to absorb sound, creating an unnatural stillness broken only by the relentless crash of waves against the rocks far below, and the incessant sigh of the wind through its decaying eaves. Its gardens, once perhaps beautiful, were now a tangled wilderness of thorns and weeds, statues broken and moss-covered, hinting at a forgotten elegance now consumed by neglect. It felt less like a place of hospitality, and more like a monument to decay and forgotten memories waiting to ensnare the unwary. Legends whispered that the original owner, a reclusive man named Alistair Blackwood, had dabbled in arts best left undisturbed. They said he had sought to commune with entities beyond the veil, using the very foundations of the hotel as a conduit. Whether true or not, a palpable sense of unease permeated the grounds, a feeling that something ancient and malevolent slumbered within its walls. The hotel had seen many owners over the decades, each trying and failing to banish the oppressive atmosphere or to make a success of the cursed establishment. Each attempt seemed only to deepen the gloom that clung to Briarcliff like a shroud, adding another layer to its already grim history. The grand entrance, with its heavy oak doors and tarnished brass fittings, looked more like the gateway to a crypt than a welcoming hotel. Above it, a faded sign creaked ominously in the wind, the words, Briarcliff Hotel, barely legible beneath layers of grime and weather stain. The building seemed to sag under the weight of its own history, its stones weeping with dampness even on the driest days. It was a place that promised no comfort, only a cold, unsettling embrace. And as the darkness of evening fully descended, the hotel appeared to merge with the shadows, becoming an indistinguishable part of the brooding landscape, waiting patiently for its next guest, its next victim. Nisha arrived late, the headlights of her small car cutting a nervous swathe through the oppressive darkness surrounding Briarcliff. Exhaustion gnawed at her. The long drive had been stressful, the directions confusing, leading her further into this isolated, forgotten corner of the coast. She had booked the room online, drawn by the surprisingly low price and the old-world charm hinted at in the grainy photographs. Now, seeing the hotel loom before her, a monstrous silhouette against a starless sky, a profound sense of regret began to settle in. The place exuded an undeniable aura of decay and sadness, far removed from any quaint charm she had imagined. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she stepped out of the car, the sound like a mournful sigh. The reception area was vast, cold, and eerily silent. A single dim bulb cast long dancing shadows across the threadbare carpets and peeling wallpaper. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for what seemed like an age. Behind a grand, dark wooden desk stood a figure so still, Nisha initially thought it was a mannequin. It was an elderly man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes pale and vacant. He moved with a slow, deliberate stiffness as if every gesture was an immense effort. He did not smile, nor did he offer any greeting beyond a slight, almost imperceptible nod when Nisha finally approached, her footsteps echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. "I have a reservation." "Nisha Sharma," she said, her voice sounding small and lost in the oppressive quiet. The old man blinked slowly, then consulted a large, leather-bound ledger with yellowed pages. His fingers, gnarled and bony, traced a line across the page with painstaking slowness. The only sounds were the rustle of the ancient paper, and Nisha's own increasingly shallow breaths. Finally, he looked up, his gaze unsettlingly direct. "Room 313, he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. He pushed a heavy, ornate brass key across the counter. It was cold to the touch. "Third floor. The lift is unreliable. Stairs are to your left." There was no offer of assistance with her single, small suitcase, no pleasantries exchanged. The air in the reception hall was frigid, carrying a faint, musty odor of damp and something else, something vaguely metallic and unsettling. Nisha felt a strong urge to turn around, to get back in her car and drive away, no matter how tired she was. But the thought of navigating those treacherous dark roads again was equally unappealing. Besides, it was just for one night. What could possibly happen in just one night? She clutched the cold key tightly in her hand, the silence of the hotel pressing in on her from all sides, a heavy, unwelcome blanket. The staircase to the left was as grand and decaying as the reception area. A once magnificent wooden banister, intricately carved, was now chipped and coated in a thick layer of dust. The runner carpet on the stairs was worn through in patches, revealing the dark wood beneath, stained with age and unknown spills. Each step Nisha took creaked alarmingly, the sound echoing up into the shadowy heights of the stairwell. She felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck that made her glance nervously over her shoulder more than once. There was, of course, nothing there but the deepening shadows and the oppressive silence of the old hotel. The corridors of the third floor were long and dim, lit by sparsely placed, flickering wall sconces that cast more shadow than light. The wallpaper, a dark floral pattern, was peeling away in damp strips, revealing patches of discolored plaster underneath. The air here was even colder, and the musty smell was stronger, mingled with a faint, sweetish odor that Nisha couldn't quite place but found deeply unpleasant. Doors lined the corridor on either side, each one dark and imposing, each bearing a tarnished brass number. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic creak of the floorboards beneath her feet and the distant, mournful howl of the wind outside, which seemed to seep through the very walls. As she walked, searching for room 313, Nisha noticed that many of the portraits lining the corridor walls had eyes that seemed to follow her. Stern-faced men and somber women from bygone eras stared out from their dusty frames, their painted gazes unnervingly lifelike. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the numbers on the doors, but the feeling of being scrutinized intensified with every step. Some of the paintings were slashed, others hung crookedly, as if disturbed by a sudden tremor or a violent act. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken history, with a sense of sorrow and unease that settled heavily upon her spirit, making her heart beat faster with a nameless dread. Finally, at the very end of the long, dim passage, she found it. Room 313. The brass numerals were tarnished, almost black, and the door itself seemed darker than the others, as if it had absorbed more of the surrounding gloom. A faint chill emanated from it, noticeable even in the already cold corridor. Nisha hesitated for a long moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The key felt unnaturally cold in her palm. A sudden, inexplicable wave of nausea washed over her. She told herself it was just tiredness, the unsettling ambiance of the old hotel getting to her. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a loud, grating click that echoed down the silent corridor like a gunshot. The room was large, larger than she had expected, and dominated by a heavy four-poster bed, draped with faded, dark velvet curtains. A tall window, covered by equally heavy drapes, presumably overlooked the same turbulent sea she had glimpsed from outside. The furniture was antique, dark wood pieces that looked solid and immovable, like silent sentinels guarding forgotten secrets. A thick layer of dust coated every surface, sparkling faintly in the meager light filtering in from the corridor as she held the door open. The air inside was colder than the hallway, a damp, penetrating chill that went straight to her bones. And that smell, the faint, sweetish, metallic odor, was stronger here, almost cloying. She closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place feeling unnervingly final. The room plunged into near darkness as the corridor light was extinguished. Fumbling for a light switch, her fingers brushed against the cold, textured wallpaper. She found a switch by the door, and a single weak bulb in a dusty chandelier flickered to life, casting a pale, sickly yellow glow over the room. It did little to dispel the shadows that clung to the corners and lurked beneath the heavy furniture. The silence in the room was profound, a heavy, expectant hush that made her own breathing sound unnaturally loud. She shivered, despite not feeling particularly cold anymore, a different kind of chill settling upon her. Nisha placed her small suitcase on a luggage rack near the wardrobe, the sound startlingly loud in the stillness. She didn't feel like unpacking. The room felt unwelcoming, hostile even. She walked over to the window and pulled back the heavy drapes with an effort. The glass was grimy, distorting the view of the churning dark sea below. The wind howled outside, pressing against the panes, making them rattle faintly in their frames. She could see no other lights, no sign of civilization, just the vast, empty expanse of water and the angry sky. The isolation of the Briarcliff Hotel was complete, absolute. A wave of loneliness, sharper and colder than any she had felt before, washed over her. She decided a quick wash would help her feel better, perhaps shake off the oppressive atmosphere of the room. The bathroom was small, with old-fashioned tarnished brass fittings. The mirror above the sink was spotted with age, reflecting her pale, tired face like a ghostly apparition. As she turned on the tap, only a trickle of rusty water emerged, accompanied by a loud gurgling sound from the pipes. It soon ran cold, ice cold. She splashed her face quickly, the water shockingly frigid. As she looked up into the mirror again, she thought she saw a flicker of movement behind her, in the reflection of the main room. But when she spun around, her heart pounding, there was nothing there. Just the silent waiting room. As the night deepened, the strange occurrences in room 313 began to escalate, subtly at first, then with growing insistence. Nisha lay stiffly in the enormous four-poster bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, unable to find sleep despite her exhaustion. The room remained stubbornly cold, a chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls, seeping into her bones. She could hear the wind moaning outside, a mournful, ceaseless lament that seemed to blend with other fainter sounds, a soft creaking from the floorboards, as if someone were pacing slowly in the darkness, or a barely audible sigh that seemed to come from the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest and most impenetrable. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, fueled by the creepy hotel and her overtired state. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable, a palpable pressure against her senses. It was as if unseen eyes were fixed upon her, observing her every breath, every nervous twitch. She kept her own eyes tightly shut, afraid of what she might see if she opened them. The silence in the room would stretch, becoming taut and heavy, only to be broken by a sudden, inexplicable noise, a soft tap on the window pane, though there were no trees nearby, or a faint rustle of the velvet bed curtains, though there was no discernible draught within the sealed chamber. At one point, she was sure she heard a whisper, a faint, sibilant sound, too indistinct to make out any words, yet undeniably there, seeming to hover just beside her ear. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She strained her ears, holding her breath, but the sound did not repeat. Instead, a small porcelain figurine on the bedside table, a shepherdess with a chipped bonnet, slowly, almost imperceptibly, rotated a few degrees on its base. Nisha stared at it in the dim light, her eyes wide with disbelief and a growing icy fear. It was impossible. There was no vibration, no tremor, nothing to explain its movement. The air in the room grew heavier, colder. The faint, sweetish, metallic odor she had noticed earlier intensified, becoming almost sickeningly strong. It reminded her of something long decayed, something best left undisturbed. She felt a profound sense of despair wash over her, a hopelessness that was as chilling as the physical cold. This room was not empty. There was something here with her, something ancient and unseen, and it was slowly making its presence known. Sleep was now an impossibility. All she could do was lie there, rigid with terror, waiting for the dawn that felt a lifetime away, praying for the night to end. Just as a sliver of grey pre-dawn light began to seep through a tiny gap in the heavy drapes, Nisha finally drifted into an uneasy, shallow sleep, her body exhausted beyond resistance. It was in this vulnerable state that the first clear manifestation occurred. She dreamt, or perhaps she was not dreaming at all, of a small child, a girl with wide, sorrowful eyes and pale, translucent skin. The child stood at the foot of the bed, her gaze fixed on Nisha with an expression of profound sadness. She wore a simple, old-fashioned white nightdress, and her dark hair was matted and unkempt. She did not speak, but her presence radiated an overwhelming sense of cold and despair. Nisha tried to scream in her dream, but no sound would come. She was paralyzed, trapped between waking and sleeping, forced to witness the silent sorrow of this spectral child. The girl slowly raised a small pale hand and pointed towards a dark, ornate wardrobe that stood in the corner of the room, its doors slightly ajar. A faint whimper seemed to escape the child's lips, a sound so heartbreaking it pierced through Nisha's fear, touching a chord of pity. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, the child began to fade, becoming more transparent, until she was nothing more than a faint shimmer in the gloom, and then she was gone. Nisha awoke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed, her body drenched in a cold sweat. The room was silent again, the first weak light of morning painting grey streaks across the floor. But the chill was still there, and the memory of the child's sorrowful eyes was seared into her mind. Was it just a nightmare? A product of her fear and the oppressive atmosphere? She tried to convince herself it was, but the image was too vivid, too real, and the child's gesture pointing towards the wardrobe felt significant, like a desperate plea. Hesitantly, driven by a compulsion she couldn't explain, Nisha got out of bed, her legs unsteady. The floorboards were icy beneath her bare feet. She approached the old wardrobe, her heart pounding. With trembling hands, she pulled open the heavy wardrobe doors. The interior was dark and smelled strongly of dust and old, decaying fabric. At first, she saw nothing but a few ancient, moth-eaten garments hanging limply from a rail. But then, her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she saw it. Tucked away in the very back corner, almost hidden beneath a pile of old linens, was a small, worn wooden toy box. Its lid was closed. The child's sorrowful face flashed in her mind. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that the box held some terrible secret, some key to the haunting of room 313, a secret the spectral child desperately wanted her to uncover. The discovery of the toy box and the spectral child's silent plea solidified Nisha's terror. She wanted nothing more than to flee room 313, to escape the Briarcliff Hotel and its suffocating atmosphere of dread. She didn't dare open the box. The thought of what it might contain, what forgotten tragedy it might reveal, was too horrifying to contemplate. Her only thought was escape. She hastily threw her few belongings back into her suitcase, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fasten the clasps. The room seemed to watch her, the silence pressing in, heavy and malevolent. The air was thick with an unspoken warning, a sense that her attempt to leave would not be welcomed. She grabbed her suitcase and wrenched open the door to the corridor, expecting to find the dim, familiar passage. Instead, she was met with an impenetrable wall of darkness. The corridor lights were out, all of them. She fumbled for her phone, its weak flashlight beam cutting a pathetic swathe through the inky blackness. The corridor seemed different somehow, longer, the doors less distinct. A cold draft snaked around her ankles, carrying whispers that seemed to mock her fear. She tried to recall the way to the stairs, but a sense of disorientation gripped her. The hotel felt like a labyrinth, its passages shifting and changing to prevent her departure. Panic began to set in. She stumbled down the corridor, her suitcase bumping against the walls, the sound echoing unnervingly in the oppressive blackness. She called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But her voice was swallowed by the silence, met only by the faint, distant moan of the wind. Reaching what she thought was the stairwell, She found only a solid wall, the wallpaper peeling, revealing damp, crumbling plaster beneath. It was as if the stairs had vanished, erased from the hotel's architecture. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. The hotel was playing with her, trapping her within its decaying embrace. It did not want her to leave. Desperate, she turned back, thinking she would try the lift, despite the old man's warning about its unreliability, if it was even still there. She retraced her steps, or tried to, but the corridor seemed to twist and turn, leading her deeper into the hotel's shadowed heart. Doors she hadn't noticed before appeared, while others seemed to have vanished. The portraits on the walls, when her faint light caught them, seemed to sneer, their eyes glinting with a malevolent amusement. The feeling of being hunted intensified. The Briarcliff was not merely a building. It was a conscious entity, a predator, and she was its ensnared prey, lost within its decaying, shifting guts. Unable to find an exit, and with the oppressive darkness of the corridors pressing in, Nisha found herself inexplicably drawn back towards room 313. It was as if an invisible force was guiding her, pulling her back to the source of her terror. The door to the room, which she was certain she had left ajar, was now firmly closed. With a sense of a dreadful inevitability, she pushed it open. The room was even colder than before, the air thick and stagnant. The spectral child was there again, standing not at the foot of the bed, but beside the old wardrobe, her translucent form shimmering faintly in the gloom. Her sorrowful eyes were fixed on Nisha, her expression more urgent, more desperate. This time the child spoke, her voice a mere whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves, yet clear in the unnatural stillness of the room. "Help me," she breathed, the sound filled with an ancient pain. "He locked me in. He won't let me leave." Her small pale hand gestured again towards the toy box, still nestled in the back of the wardrobe. Nisha felt a conflict within her, the instinct to flee warring with a strange, burgeoning sense of responsibility, of pity for this lost, spectral soul. The child's plea was so raw, so filled with suffering, that it momentarily overrode her own terror. She took a hesitant step towards the wardrobe, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath her feet. As Nisha reached for the toy box, the atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. The temperature plummeted, and a low growl seemed to emanate from the very walls. The heavy velvet curtains around the bed billowed violently, though the window remained closed. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, coalescing into indistinct, menacing shapes. A malevolent presence, far older and more powerful than the child, made itself known. It was a force of pure hatred and despair, the lingering will of Alistair Blackwood, or perhaps something even more ancient that he had awakened. The room began to shake, objects rattling on the surfaces, the chandelier swaying precariously. The spectral child cowered, her form flickering, as if the malevolent energy was trying to extinguish her. "He's angry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He doesn't want you to know." The room was filled with a cacophony of disembodied whispers, angry and threatening. Nisha felt an immense pressure, a crushing weight on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash, plunging the room into near darkness again, save for the faint, ghostly light of the child. The terrifying revelation was dawning. The room itself was a prison, not just for the child, but for anyone who uncovered its secrets. And now, it seemed, it was her prison too. The full extent of Nisha's ordeal within the confines of room 313 remained shrouded in the oppressive silence of the Briarcliff Hotel. Whether she managed to open the toy box, whether she confronted the malevolent entity, or whether she succumbed to the horrors within those four walls was a tale the hotel kept to itself. The heavy oak doors of Briarcliff rarely offered up those who delved too deep into its secrets. The wind continued its mournful song around the decaying structure, carrying whispers of past and present torments out to the turbulent sea, where they were lost in the crash of waves against the jagged cliffs below. The hotel stood, as it always had, a silent, brooding sentinel. Weeks later, under a similarly bruised and threatening sky, Another car made its slow, hesitant way up the treacherous, winding path to the Briarcliff Hotel. Inside, a lone traveler, a young man named Thomas, looked up at the imposing silhouette with a mixture of weariness and curiosity. He too had been drawn by the allure of a cheap room in a place that promised solitude, a respite from the noise of the world. He was unaware of the hotel's dark reputation, blind to the palpable sense of dread that clung to its ancient stones. He saw only an old building, perhaps a little run down, but with a certain Gothic charm he found appealing for a short stay. The reception area was just as cold, just as silent, as it had been for Nisha. The same elderly man stood behind the grand, dark wooden desk, his face an unreadable mask of wrinkles, his eyes pale and vacant. He moved with the same slow, deliberate stiffness. Thomas announced his arrival, his voice a little too loud in the cavernous space. The old man blinked slowly, his gaze unsettlingly direct, before consulting the ancient, leather-bound ledger. His gnarled fingers traced a line across the yellowed page. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of paper and the distant, ever-present sigh of the wind outside the grimy windows. Room 313, the old man finally rasped, his voice unchanged like dry leaves skittering across stone. He pushed a heavy, ornate brass key across the counter. It was cold to the touch, just as it had been for Nisha. Third floor. The lift is still unreliable. Stairs are to your left. Thomas took the key, a slight shiver running down his spine, though he couldn't say why. He was tired from his journey. He just wanted to rest. He thanked the receptionist, who merely nodded, his vacant eyes following Thomas as he turned towards the shadowy stairwell, unaware of the horrors that awaited him, and the cycle that was about to begin anew in the haunted confines of room 313.